Chapter 2. "Wake up, sleepyhead," Mira said, throwing a pillow at Saria as she blinked. "Mm-hmm," Saria replied, not sure when she had fallen asleep. It had been long after Mira had begun snoring, her dragonborn mouth hanging open at an alarming angle. As she lifted her head from her pillow, a dull ache let her know she had drunk more than she ought to have done. Ulfr wagged his tail, the large wolf sitting by the door. He only waited for Saria to look at him before he came bounding up onto the bed and licked her face. When Saria had first found him in the woods, she had been very intimidated by him, but something about him had called to her, and it seemed she appealed to him too. He had not left her side since, and he seemed to understand her commands, and sometimes even her thoughts. "Let's go join the fellas for breakfast, and then we can go see Bernard," Mira added as she quickly donned her leather armor and grabbed her backpack. Saria made herself presentable as quickly as she could, and then followed Mira down the stairs. They had stayed at the inn several times, the building familiar, and the same room usually theirs. Andorn wasn't far ahead of them, Saria catching the trailing wisp of the end of his cloak as he descended the stairs in front of them and turned the corner. Ulfr trailed behind, sniffing the air several times, but coming along after. When they stepped into the inn's common room, they found only one other set of travelers had stayed the night and were in need of breakfast. A couple of men Jarlen was standing near. Despite having drunk more than the rest of them, Jarlen seemed neither hungover nor put off having more, another tankard in his hand, while the three of them talked about something to do with the nearby port and where the travelers could find safe ship's passage.
"Thank you for the recommendations,"
one of them said as Saria, Andorn, and Mira sat down at a table nearby, but not too close.
"Least I could do in return for such a good ale to start the day,"
Jarlen replied, almost swaggering over to join Saria and her friends for breakfast. "I could set my sundial by when you all turn up for your meals," the waitress said as she put down a jug of water, some tumblers, and a platter of fruit before them. "Ma says the good stuff will be along shortly. She don't think you'll have to go hungry, but now that the pass is open and we can trade again, she thought you might like to try some of these." "They look delicious," Mira replied, always the bubbly one of the group, although this time she wasn't far wrong. There were some delicious-looking berries, something Saria wouldn't have thought ought to be ripe yet, and some fresh grapes. They looked wonderful. "Ma said something about them being grown in houses of glass or tunnels or the like, but even for strange methods like that, they're sweet enough." The waitress gave them a little curtsy and hurried back towards the kitchens. For a moment, there was complete silence, the four adventurers tucking into the juicy fruit. True to the waitress' words, the grapes and berries were sweet enough, although they weren't the best Saria had ever tasted. Given how hard it was to get such things out of season, she didn't plan to complain.
"Shouldn't we save some for Thorgrim? If we scoff the lot, we might never hear the end of it," Jarlen said a moment later, more caring than he'd care to admit if you asked him directly.
"He's already on duty," Andorn replied. "The temple needed him."
"What could the temple want with a cleric at this time of the morning?"
For a moment, all three of them stared at Jarlen. More than once, Saria had wondered how oblivious to what was happening Jarlen could be, but she thought he had picked up on the dwarf's role in this town society just fine. "Babies don't wait for times of day or night that are convenient," Mira replied, "and someone has to make sure it's all sorted correctly."
"I'd have thought delivering babies is more the sister's area of expertise."
Jarlen focused on his fruit as he spoke, his cheeks already a darker shade of pink. "Aye, if it were going along as normal, but Thorgrim said the baby hadn't turned," Andorn said back, glancing towards the kitchen as the waitress reappeared. "Rather him than me," Mira replied. Silence fell between them, everyone transfixed with the sight of the delicious-looking food. The waitress placed 4 plates on the table along with cutlery, followed by the most enormous platter of food. Crispy bacon sat beside fried mushrooms, eggs, and potatoes. There was even a sausage apiece, and hunks of fresh warm bread slathered in melting butter. Lastly, the waitress put a huge bowl on the floor for Ulfr, full of a mix of different scraps and meats all together. He gave a slight rough before stuffing his nose right in it and, true to his nature, wolfing it down. They had to pay extra to see him fed as much as any of them, but the townsfolk had soon got used to the large beast and accepted him as long as Sarya kept him close.
Tell your boss she's a marvel, and she's made 4 people incredibly happy once more,
Jarlan said, the first to take a plate. Sarya hesitated, never sure of the etiquette behind such a meal, but Andorn only waited a few seconds after Mira had also taken a plate to grab one. Instantly, he began taking a little of everything, making sure the plate was full, but not overly so. A moment later, he put it down in front of her, giving Sarya a wink before he picked up the final plate and started again, this time taking more. Sarya gave him an almost imperceptible nod, grateful he'd sensed her plight and rescued her. It wasn't the first time he'd done it, but it was rare they ate a large meal at the inn lately, and it was the only place where their meals didn't already come on plates, or weren't handed to her already portioned. It might be only a little thing to others, but how much to take and when was an issue Sarya struggled with. This way she could eat what was on her plate, and if it was too much, she knew one of her friends would happily finish what she left. If it was too little, Sarya would probably go a little hungry. Jarlan and Mira faster eaters with bigger appetites. Today, however, they all finished at the same time and sat back, everyone stuffed, despite there being food left on the platter. Ulfr had finished a while ago, and he had curled up on the floor near Sarya's feet, his head resting on his paws. "Ma finally got you beat?" the waitress asked, smiling as she came to collect everything up.
It would appear so. If we'd had the dwarf, things might have been different,
Jarlan replied. Sarya smiled, finding it more than a little amusing that Jarlan seemed to alternately praise and censor Thorgrim. They had begun their friendship with an interesting sort of deliberate animosity and would often criticize each other to each other's faces, only to stand up for them 5 seconds later if anyone outside of their group tried to do anything similar. And they had fought beside each other more than once and risked their lives for the other. The relationship dynamic wasn't new to Sarya, but it amused her nonetheless. "Right. I'm going to find Bernard," Mira said, getting up. Sarya stood up too. "We'll come find you both at the guild when we're done. Can't imagine Sarya and I will come to much harm on the road these days." "Not with Ulfr with you, and that fire breath you can do," Andorn replied. "And Sarya wields a bow better than anyone else I know." Sarya grinned, picking up her bow and slinging it on her back. Taking this as his cue, Ulfr also got to his feet and trotted along beside Sarya. The sun had come up more than an hour before Mira and Sarya stepped outside, and it shone brightly in the sky, a few fluffy clouds all it had for company. It was early spring now, and flowers were blooming everywhere. Trees were covered in blossom, and birds tweeted merrily as they made nests and laid eggs in them. "It's hard to imagine this place was covered in snow only a few weeks ago," Mira said. "The seasons vary more this far up north." "Yes, I'm not used to such harsh winters," Sarya replied, feeling safe with such a generic comment. "Did you grow up among the elves?" Mira asked. "I did. I think it's why I like the forest around our guild so much," Sarya said, trying to deflect the interest in her upbringing without being too obvious. Either Mira sensed her desire to not talk about her past, or didn't have as much interest as Sarya feared, because they fell silent and stayed that way until they reached the house Bernard would be in. They had first met the man while sneaking into another's house, the mayor's butler. The butler had been behind several attacks on the town, as well as a plot to destroy the economy and the livelihoods of the farmers. The first task Saria had accomplished with the adventurers she now spent her days with had been putting a stop to the butler's evil plans. Bernard had been a servant of the butlers and had helped them apprehend the criminal. Now he lived in the house the butler had left behind and was in training to replace the very man he served. Given his role, it was more than fitting in Saria's mind. As they approached the door, Saria took a good look at the house in daylight. They had snuck in at night before, and from the back of the house and the servants' entrance. The front was much more imposing, although still not as grand as the mayor's. Mira walked right up to the wooden door and rapped on it with her knuckles, the sound startling a nearby bird from a tree branch, as well as making Ulfr lift his head and come in a little closer to Saria's side. The last time they'd been in the house, they'd fought several bandits, but the basement had also held a wolf-like creature, something they'd been hard-pressed to beat. No doubt Ulfr remembered it. Mira was just stepping forward to knock again when there was the sound of scraping metal beyond, and the door finally swung open. Millie looked out at them, understanding on her face as she spotted them, but she didn't speak. Millie waved them into the house, smiling as she did. They had also saved her from a difficult situation. The butler had cut out her tongue to prevent her from talking. "Is Bernard here?" Mira asked, letting Saria hang back. The mute woman nodded and beckoned for them to follow her. Although they knew the house well, after having explored it all in the dead of night, they let themselves be led to whatever room Bernard had decided to use for his own office now he was the master of the house.
"Ladies, come in," Bernard said. "Thank you, Millie, for bringing two of our favorite adventurers to see me. What can I help you with?"
"We want to make true on our promise to help find your sister."
"You do?"
Bernard replied, offering them both a seat. Neither of them sat down, but it didn't stop him offering them a drink as well. Again, they declined.
"I must confess I had assumed you'd all forgotten by now, and I was going to try and find Kiana myself. Although I'm not sure where to begin, and I'm afraid the trail would be far too cold for me to follow."
"We'd have come to help sooner, but we've had a few troubles of our own. What with the priest being gone as well, and needing to keep a roof over ourselves. We're here now, though. I hope you don't think too ill of us."
"Nay, I could never. You've already done a lot for this town, and I'm sure if anyone can find her and bring her back safely, it's the five of you. Could the others not come with you today?"
"Yarlin is helping fix something for Widow Venton," Saria replied. "Andorn is taking care of a loose end for us, and you're probably aware Thorgrim is still standing in for the missing new priest."
"Ah, yes. Thorgrim has been so kind. It seems as if lots are missing at the moment, and it was so strange of our priest to leave as he did."
"Perhaps we can help right at least one wrong in terms of the missing people then," Mira said. "What can you tell us of your sister's disappearance?"
"Well, it was something that didn't seem so out of the ordinary at the time. Obviously, you know what was going on in the house. But long before Kiana left, she had begun acting differently. Charlin had got her doing some dirty work of his. She'd be asked to take care of something for him on a regular basis, daily as far as I was aware, something she dreaded doing."
"Do you know what it was?"
"No." Bernard shook his head. "I wish I did. I know it might shine some light, but alas, it's still a mystery. She spent a lot of time in the kitchens with Millie, but what she would tell me of, she can't any longer."
What of the night and the last few days before her disappearance? She'd begun acting funny, keeping her distance, even told me a few times that she was protecting me, but she never said what from. A few times she did let me question her. She told me it was best I knew nothing of it, that it kept me innocent, and she didn't want me caught up in anything that would compromise me too. So it sounds like Trollin had Kiana doing something for him, Mira said. Possibly. I confess it's what I assumed, and I know it's possible that she's no longer with us.
Bernard choked up, but after taking a couple of deep breaths and closing his eyes for a couple of seconds, he opened them and carried on.
I think I'd feel it if she wasn't around any longer. Like a bond exists between us. I might be mad, but I think she's alive. But sometimes it feels like things aren't quite right. There were a few nights last month when I just couldn't sleep for worrying. We understand your fears. We'll do what we can to find her. But what can you tell us about the exact night she disappeared?
Saria said, trying not to show the impatience she already felt. Although Bernard clearly cared, he wasn't telling them anything they didn't already know.
Sorry, I can't say much, other than I was awoken that night too. I thought I heard a noise down in the kitchens, something clattering, so I took up my candle and went down to investigate. It wasn't an area of the house I visited much, but when I got down there, the kitchen lamps were lit. I couldn't get into the room, however. By the time I had thought to try and find the key, Millie appeared as well. She ushered me up to bed, looking a little scared. So she might know what happened? Possibly. But as I said, if she does, she can't tell us. I do know I heard a carriage shortly after, though, and it was late or early, depending on your point of view, for a carriage. Especially as only 3 people in the entire town were wealthy enough to afford one. The mayor, Lady Killen, and our priest. Well, our old priest. Given he was also gone around then, I assumed it was him. But you'd best know as not. It's not like I have a lot I can tell you.
Thank you, Mira said, patting the man's hand. He had slumped more and more as he spoke, and Saria's heart went out to him. She knew it couldn't be easy for him to wonder what had happened to his family. Not knowing was sometimes worse than losing someone for good. As they were about to leave, Ulfr got up and trotted over to the chest of drawers, giving it a good sniff, before coming back to Saria.
Oh, he must have smelled the spot of coffee I have in there. In case of emergencies. Pretty good nose on him, Bernard said. I've got it wrapped up and in a tin.
Saria paused for a moment, Ulfr's actions giving her an idea.
Do you have something of your sister's? Something that would have her scent on it? It might not help us trace her from here, but if we do manage to figure out where she went, it might aid us later. Oh yes, what a wonderful idea. With so few servants in the house, we left her room as she left it. I'm sure there will be something in there.
Bernard led them partially back the way they had come, and then towards the servants' quarters. Ulfr came along without needing to be asked, sticking close to Saria's side. Briefly, she wondered if he remembered the place and the battles they'd fought there. But if he did, he didn't feel threatened today. Once inside Kiana's room, Bernard reached for the bedding and pulled the casing off a pillow. Saria wrapped it in a cloth and tucked it in her backpack, intending to show Ulfr when the time was right.
This will probably smell strongest of her. Forgive the fact it's not been cleaned. Millie would have done it, but at my request she didn't touch the room. Don't fret, and please, don't feel like you've done something strange in your grief, Mira replied. I've seen grief spur folks on to stranger things.
Bernard nodded and gave them a wan smile before they made their own way out. On the way, they looked for Millie. They found her in the kitchens and tried to ask her a few questions, but fear and the barrier of her own lack of speech got them nowhere.